Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to be talking about the structure of the chloroplast. Now the chloroplast is an organelle found within the plant cell, and by organelle I mean a smaller component of a cell, if you like. So if we think of a very basic plant cell, in fact let's think of the palisade cell within the leaf. And you have things like the cytoplasm, the vacuole, the cell wall and the cell membrane. There's this other organelle, the chloroplast, that's involved in photosynthesis. Now, there are two main stages, the light-independent and the light-dependent reaction. Now, I talk about these in more detail in a separate video because different parts of the process of photosynthesis happen at different areas or different regions within a chloroplast. So instead in this video all I'm going to do is talk very generally about the structure. So in the top left corner of the screen I've got a diagrammatic version of it, and in the bottom right I have an image of a chloroplast taken with an electron microscope. So we'll talk about the diagrammatic colour version at the top, and then I'll show you where the parts are on this real electron micrograph. So let's start first of all with the membranes. Now at the top what we have here is an outer membrane. So we've got an outer membrane there, and if we were to draw that on this picture, the electron micrograph, we're really looking at this part here. Now clearly we've got an outer, which would imply that we have an inner, and the inner membrane is this one that we have labelled here. So our inner membrane, you might be able to see, is that one just a little bit inside there. Now the inner and outer membrane together form what we call a chloroplast envelope. So there's two membranes form what's called chloroplast envelope. Now let's look at this next label down. I'm going to highlight this one in capitals because it's really important. These are what are called thylakoids. Now thylakoids are, if you like, membranous sacs. That's one way to think of them. These internal thylakoid membranes, if you like, so these thylakoids are basically sacs with a membrane around the outside of them. The thylakoid membranes that are fluid filled form what's called a granum when stacked. So these thylakoids, so if I just highlight in red, so we have one thylakoid here, second thylakoid here, another thylakoid here. But together, when we take these membranous sacs that have fluid within them and stack them up, what we get is a granum. So this here we'll label as a granum. So one thylakoid stack can be put on top of another and another to form a granum, and the granum when stacked has a very intense green colour. So let's look at the electron micrograph and see if we can pick those up. So you can see, if I highlight in red this whole region here, for example, there we quite clearly have one of these granums that I'm referring to, these stacked membranous sacs. So clearly a thylakoid would just be one of these on its own, one of these individual ones. And the surrounding membrane of the thylakoid is called the thylakoid membrane. That's really important, especially when we look at the processes of photosynthesis. So we've put in place the outer and inner membrane forming the chloroplast envelope. We've put in the thylakoids and the granum. So then we're left with one final label. And this is the stroma. Now the stroma is this region that we see here. In a typical animal or plant cell, you might think there's a bit like the cytoplasm region. So it's the area surrounding these grana, or these stacks of thylakoids. The stroma is also a bit like the mitochondrial matrix. So in a separate video I talk about the structure of the mitochondria. It's a bit like the matrix of that, because in the stroma we have DNA and 70S type ribosomes. So I'm just going to make a note of those 2 points here. So in the stroma we have DNA. We also have 70S type ribosomes. But we also have various enzymes. Now, photosynthesis relies on a significant number of enzymes, not least ATP synthase in the process of oxidative phosphorylation, so when we're generating ATP. So enzymes are crucial and they're found within that stroma. So we have DNA, 70S type ribosomes, we've got various enzymes. Now, post photosynthesis, so I'm going to put this in brackets here, post photosynthesis, you can also find two other things in the stroma: starch, but also lipid. And that's what these, if I highlight them in green, for example, that's what these larger sort of dots on this electron microscope represent. These are starch grains post photosynthesis. Now that's the basic structure of a chloroplast. Got outer in a membrane. We've got membranous sacs called thylakoids that stack together, form what's called a granum. And then surrounding those we have the stroma, which contains a variety of things: DNA, ribosomes, enzymes, but also starch and lipid molecules post photosynthesis. So there we have the very basic structure of a chloroplast, and I go in more detail about what goes on in each of these regions, so what happens in the stroma and what happens in the thylakoids and the thylakoid membranes, in the separate videos on the light-dependent and light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. Okay, I hope all that helps.